This pure oil node is processing 300 crude oil into fuel, which is enough to power 10 generators or provide 2.5 gigawatts of power. But this facility is also processing 300 crude oil into fuel, producing enough fuel to power 40 generators, the equivalent of 10 gigawatts of power. And this is why investing time unlocking alternate recipes and pairing them can be incredibly beneficial in your playthrough. After all, we've just 4 times power production with just a handful of recipes. And in today's video, I'm going to break down the exact layout that you need to do this. But before we get started, you may be wondering why we need so much fuel. Well, having set up radio control units in our last video, we decided that moving forwards we'll need to expand on production in the Spire Coast, producing more computers and, more importantly, supercomputers to unlock nuclear power and leading edge production to enable us to produce the magnetic field generators and thermal propulsion rockets that we're going to need to unlock the next space elevator tier. And they are going to require a fair bit of power. Now, this all may sound a little complex, but don't worry, the whole point of this guided playthrough is to break down the game step by step to help you go from the very beginning of the game to the end. So let's cover today's topics and get started. First, we'll go over the alt recipes that we're going to be looking for this particular run. And we'll also cover a little trick to ensure you get the recipes you're wanting, though it might be a little cheaty-ish. And then we're going to cover the first of 2 ways to quadruple fuel production. This setup is available once you've unlocked refineries with the right recipes, but will be slightly more complicated, so we will also cover Cannister Recycling, because if you get this wrong, you may struggle to have a running plant. And then finally, we'll cover the second setup to quadruple fuel production, which is easier to set up if you're at the same stage of the game as me. Now, just before we get started, I did want to mention that this actual setup is set up for 600 crude oil rather than the 300 crude oil that I've currently got it clocked at. And the reason that I've clocked it at 300 was because I didn't have the power shards to place in here at the time to double it up. So it's actually not 10, but 20 generators that can run from this particular setup. So I'm just going to do that really quickly so that you can see how much we can produce on a pure node with the base recipes. And it really is simple to just expand on this. We just need to overclock to 250. You can see we've got our 600 crude oil. This is already set up. We can just leave that. And then each of these we want to just overclock. We're not going to bother with adding more generators. We're just going to copy and paste what we currently have. This is going to give us an extra 2.5 gigawatts of power, which is going to help out, but obviously the big surplus of power is going to come from today's setup. And with a little bit of luck, it's going to stay flat. So let's talk alternate recipes. You can see that we have 2 fuel recipes available to us. We have the fuel one. However, there is also another recipe, which is the residual fuel, which turns heavy oil residue into fuel. Also, this isn't great for producing fuel as the main product, but if you're trying to produce, say, plastic or rubber, you'll be getting heavy oil residue from that, which will allow you to gain some power. So for example, 180 crude oil would turn into 60 heavy oil residue, which would allow you to produce 40 fuel per minute, which is 2 generators. However, there are numerous recipes in the oil tree in Satisfactory that are particularly beneficial. We'll be talking about other ones in a later episode, notably the recycled plastic and rubber recipes. But today we're going to be talking about 3 particular recipes. The first one is the heavy oil residue alternate recipe, and we need to unlock that with a hard drive in the MAM. So, ooh, wonderful. If we scroll down here, we actually have it already unlocked. That's this recipe here. And the great thing about this, if we just quickly grab it, you'll notice that with this one, we're turning 30 crude oil into 10 heavy oil residue and 20 plastic. But if we want to make heavy oil residue the main produce from our crude oil, we can get 4 times the amount of heavy oil residue from that same 30 crude oil. Which means with 180, so 6 times this, we'd actually be able to produce 240 heavy oil residue, which with the residual fuel would be 160 fuel per minute, which is the equivalent of 8 generators worth of power. That is not bad. If you find this recipe, the alternate heavy oil residue recipe, grab it as soon as you can. Do not waste it by rescanning to try and get a different recipe. This is possibly the best recipe in the game, especially when it is accompanied by another recipe, which we're going to try and find now. Now, it might be quite difficult finding the recipe that we need. The particular one that I'm going to be looking for, there's 2. There is the diluted packaged fuel, which actually we've already unlocked. It's here. Fantastic. That means we're not going to be waiting too long to do the first setup. But the second one we need is the blend fuel. This is only available once you've got blenders unlocked, which thankfully we have now. But you can see we've got 1 hard drive that is able to be rescanned. So what you need to do, and it's a little bit cheaty, but providing you save your game before you rescan a hard drive, you'll find that you can, if you don't have the recipe that you want, reload the game. So here we are, and if you remember rightly, this was the 6 inventory space, and we also had the cable. And there you go, we have different recipes. If you do want to do this, I highly recommend having multiple recipes that haven't been rescanned and saving and loading. But again, it is a little bit cheaty, so I don't recommend it. Anyway, we are now going to unlock the diluted packaged fuel. I'm going to try and find the blend fuel separately. Now, whilst we wait for this hard drive to unlock, we're going to head back to the hub because we now need to unlock a new hub milestone. And that particular hub milestone is found in tier 5. It's the fluid packaging, and this is going to allow us to package water, oil, packaged fuel, packaged heavy oil residue, basically everything that we need for the time being. So we are going to very quickly send this off, and we now have access to the packager. Good news. So the hard drive is now done. Let's quickly have a look what we've got. Unfortunately, it's not what we needed, nor is that, although that is very useful. We're going to search another one, and then I will show you what I've been working on in the meantime. I took the initiative to build a little layout to show you how the recipes are going to work together before we actually do the setup. Okay, so we know about the heavy oil residue and how it's really useful because it turns that crude oil into heavy oil residue en masse for us. If we use the heavy oil residue along with the alternate for diluted packaged fuel, we'll be able to produce 318 fuel, which is the equivalent to 15.9 generators, and that's just 120. And the idea is that we take the crude oil and we run it across to our first refinery setup, turning that crude oil into heavy oil residue, and then we're going to send that polymer resin, which we're not currently using but we might do in the future, to the sink. This is really important. You don't want this buffer to fill up because it will stop you being able to produce any more heavy oil residue, which we need to come across here to our second refinery. This refinery will then take that heavy oil residue as well as 60 packaged water per minute to output the canisters filled with fuel. The interesting thing about this setup though is we can use a packager set to unpackaged fuel to output empty canisters, and fuel. The fuel will then run across to our generators, but we still need that 60 packaged water per minute. Well, the empty canisters that will be outputted from here can then feed directly into a packager, which is taking 60 water per minute from an extractor, combining it with those empty canisters to produce those packaged fuel. Notice that this section here is a loop. It is really important that even if you have multiple refineries, that you keep each refinery and packager and unpackager set up on its own dedicated line. So with this in mind, we are going to set up really quickly 2 little blueprints for us to use. We're going to do a basic manifold with our refineries, and then we're going to do a basic circuit with our recycled section of refineries as well. Now what I'm going to do for this particular build is, though we can fit 4 refineries in, I'm going to try and make this as quick and easy for ourselves as possible. So we're going to place 3 with room either side, and this will allow us to set up the auto connect feature for the blueprints. While we're here, we're going to make sure that these are color coded and that they're all with the same recipe. And then we're going to grab our outputs, grab a merger, and we're going to send all of the polymer resin to the left of the build. Let's make sure these are the fastest conveyors that we have. And then for this segment, we're going to lift the conveyor up. I'm going to do the same on this side as well. And this is going to allow us to create a connection point for the conveyors on the other blueprint. We're going to do the same with the piping, except the piping is going to send the fuel, or the heavy oil residue, sorry, in the opposite direction to the polymer, though you won't notice because we're just going to be running a merging line. Now there is reason to believe that by auto connecting with pipes that it may cause some bugs in game. If this is happening to your save, you will have to remove the connection sections and rebuild them. On this side, we're going to bring our crude oil, and we're going to make sure that we're using the same pipe throughout. So even though this is only planned to be a 300 crude oil pipe setup, we will use the Mark II because it'll make it easy to upgrade later on. The last thing that I'm going to do here is just bring up to the top a beam. And we're just daisy chaining these together by nudging, which is done by pressing H and then using the left and right page up, page down keys to nudge it into the right position. And from here, we'll be able to connect these manually to the next segment. But that is our first blueprint setup. We're going to use this a lot, so we'll just put it in the hotbar and we'll get started on the next segment where we're going to be packaging water. Let's place this as close to the edge as possible, and we're going to grab our refinery. It's going to be doing the diluted packaged fuel alternate recipe. I think we're going to have to push this back a touch. So we also need enough room for this pipe. We're going to connect it with a Mark I conveyor, and then we're going to place our other packager in line with the front of the refinery. And so from here, it's going to receive that packaged fuel and unpackage it into fuel in a pipe and empty canisters, which are going to flow all the way around to the water packager. We're going to set up a water line. So we will place that there. So this one will be set to bring in the water and will feed directly into there. We're going to need another one, which is going to be for fuel. Now with all liquids that are exiting a liquid-based product machine, all of them have 10 meters head lift, which means we know that we can get up to 3 pipes high. So this section will be for fuel, and then this top one, we're going to need to sort out a junction for it, is going to be for heavy fuel residue. And this is going to run all the way down and directly into there. If you don't like clipping, you can change the positioning slightly, but the idea of this is just to be as quick and dirty as possible to get the job done. And this is basically the concept for the blueprint that we're going to be using to produce that diluted packaged fuel. The fuel will run to where the generators are. The water will run from the water extractors, and the heavy oil residue obviously from the refineries. The last thing to do is to sort out power. So with those two blueprints sorted, we can now start prepping the area. With this particular recipe, because we're going to be using a lot of water, obviously it makes sense to have it somewhere along the coastline. Thankfully, we are there. And we're going to be taking the 300 oil from this section. We're going to run that over to this area where we've got so much space, and we'll also set up our water extractors alongside that. So give me 2 moments whilst I set up a little platform, then we'll get started. Okay, we are pretty much ready, but we also have this. So recycle plastic. This is one of the best recipes in the game. We're going to be using this at a future date, but for now we're still looking for the blend diluted fuel. Still not got it. Okay, just have to sort it out in a moment and get some more hard drives on the go. But before we do that, we have our crude oil, or soon to be crude oil, traveling down there. We've also grabbed some resources so that we don't go running back and forth to the hub, and we've just encased our pipe with these small concrete pillars. Really simple to do. Just if you want to do this, I'm using the nudge tool to allow us to place these. And you start off with the first one either by placing a concrete pillar vertical and then holding control whilst you're placing down your small concrete pillar, and that will allow you to snap it like so. Or the other option, the old school method, would be to place down a segment of beam and then snapping the concrete pillar to the beam. Again, you can nudge this how you want so that it's aligned like so. Anyway, with this all the way to the end now, I think we are about ready to get started. So we'll connect this up, make sure that we're producing 300 crude oil per minute, and then connect that back to our network, and this should now start bringing oil along to the platform where we can get started with our setup. And here we are. So we have our little platform here. I haven't actually worked out how many of these we need, so we're just going to roughly work out the setup. As we mentioned in the last video, a great way to kind of mark where you're going to be building is to just color in where you think everything will go. So we know, using the tool satisfactorytools.com, let me pull that across right now, ta-da, that with this build we're able to produce 800 fuel per minute. But for this we're going to need 10 heavy oil residue refineries with a further 13.33 refineries for the diluted packaged fuel. And obviously it's a 1-to-1 ratio on the packages and unpackages. So we know that we need 10 refineries, and it's roughly 1 refinery to 2 foundations. So we're looking at about 20 across. So 4, 6, 8, 10, oh dear, 12. I'm going to have to add some more. Okay, and here we are. We now have a slightly longer build. We're going to start off by running our crude oil down. This is actually ever so slightly lower. And this is actually a really good thing for us because there's going to be more downward pressure here. It means that we should only have sloshing along this line. It's something that you'll need to bear in mind for bigger setups, bigger lines, but we shouldn't need to worry about anything with this one. Now that we have our crude oil ready, we're going to place our first heavy oil residue set of refineries, and we are going to place them just over there. So from here, hopefully, we'll be able to connect these. It would be really nice if they could go there, but you can see this section isn't connected. So instead it would be better for us to place them there. I will run this along, connect the power up, and we want to also connect the power here. And I'm just going to do a nice little decorational section here so that we can nicely bring this down either side quite cleanly where we need it. Now that we have power along here, we can just hover across and add our next 3. That's not, oh, we've actually got a lot more room than I thought we had. Wonderful. So we can just add the 10th one here on the end. And then at this point, all we need to do is connect all of these together. And with that now done, we can connect the crude oil up to this segment, and we should find that this will start running. At this point, we need to make sure that we are syncing the polymer resin in order to continue producing the heavy oil residue. And obviously, if the buffers are full of heavy oil residue, the system will shut down as well. So that there is the first section done. And you can see they are now all turned on, but that won't last for long because the heavy oil residue is going to fill up the buffers. So for the time being, I'm just going to place a buffer here. You don't really need to do this. We can just nice and easily delete, like flush the system if we wanted to, and it will turn back on. But it can be nice just to have a couple of these for decorational purposes. Why not? At this point, we need to start working out where we're going to be placing our diluted packaged fuel setup. Now remember, we need the heavy oil residue, and the best system would be to run it all in a line. It would be a long line, and we'd have the heavy oil residue just pumped up to this line, and we could have our water being brought from out this end, and our fuel would merge onto this to be used. But we're going to do it slightly differently. Given that we have this limited space, what I'm going to do is place these horizontally, and we're going to set it up all the way down here. Thinking ahead, we might want to make these little corridors to walk down. So I'm going to give myself a full foundation in between, and then on the other side, I'm going to do the same. And for this setup, we're going to need 13.33 of these. So if you remember, we can see it here, 13.33. This means what we're going to do is place 14 of these, and we're going to split the 1.33 between both lines. That way we can feed each section 400 water. We can feed each section 200 heavy oil residue as well, and it should be perfect. So each line needs to be 7 long. So this is now more or less set up. The only thing we need to do is connect the lines and add some water extractors. So let's quickly connect up the power between these two sections. Connect these up. And feel free to experiment. I've given you a very basic design here. You don't really need to add all of these pillars, but it just changes the look of the build a little bit. And you'll find that as you get further into the game, you're going to be using the refineries more and more. One thing that is very real in Satisfactory is the refinery sprawl. You'll find that most of your builds require refineries, and sometimes it can look a little bit boring because it's all the same. So to work out the clock speed for the last 2 refineries, the one on each end, we need to take that 1.333 and we're going to divide that by 2, which will leave us with a 66.6665% clock speed. 66.665. There you go, we've got that 40 per minute. And we're going to just copy using Control-C and paste here. We'll do the same with this one as well. Next, we're going to run that heavy oil residue all the way across. And we're going to want it to make its way all the way up to the top here. I'm going to connect this joint here with the joint, skipping the support on that side. And I'm going to do this in, horizontal vertical mode to make that look quite clean. That also means that this should be quite clean as well. Now with this section, remember that we have a total of 10 head lift. Thankfully, we place down our 4-meter walls and then 2 1-meter walls. The head lift should push the heavy oil up to this segment. However, because the rest of this is lower, there's a good chance that we're going to get sloshing along the line. So to kind of avoid that, I'm going to grab a pump, and this should just continue pumping the heavy oil residue back up to this segment. The next thing to do is to sort out our water. So we're going to grab our water lines and we're going to have this segment as a walkway, and then that water can come down to here, and we're going to run a single line out, and we're going to place some water extractors. Now for the water extractors, to make it nice and easy for us, we're going to place the foundations under the water. 1 meter to, I think, 2 meters is normally okay. And this will allow us, when we grab our water extractor, to snap the water extractor to the grid rather than have the free placement over here. The next thing that we're going to do is just grab our pipe joints, and each water extractor will produce 120 to 300 water. Now with these, they cannot be nudged, which is why it's useful to have them placed on top of a foundation. 240, we need 400 on each line, and we've got 4 power shards. I need more power shards. Never mind, we are going to place 3 of these. We're holding control while we're placing these, so we don't need to worry about the grid there. And we're going to make sure that this one on the end is at 160. We're going to do the same for this one as well, and then connect all of these pipes together. And don't worry, I will be showing the whole build from a bird's eye point of view at the end. We have now set up our water extractors, and we also have our heavy oil residue pumping to where it needs to go to. If we quickly check here, we can see, there we go, the water is starting to enter in and run along this manifold, which is what we want to see. So the only thing we need to worry about now in order to produce the heavy oil residue is the most important thing, which is the empty canisters. And though we can, say, have a manifold line feeding these with empty canisters, we don't actually want to do that. So what we're going to do is quickly jump back to the factory. We're going to set up a temporary line to produce empty canisters for us. We're going to make sure that we have 200 empty canisters with 14 lines. We're going to need to produce 2,800 empty canisters. So let's head back to base. And whilst we're here, we'll also check the alternative recipes. Oh, we've done it. We've got it. This is it. Now this is just as efficient as the system that we've got over there, but it skips out the packaging. However, we're going to make sure that the system that we've got is running first and foremost, which means we need to produce some empty canisters. And at the moment, we have just 1 recipe for it, which is the plastic one. So we're going to grab all of this and probably all of the plastic back at base, and we'll set up a temporary summer slooped line. Now to produce the canisters, we're going to be doing these. How? I don't get it. There must be someone who is purposefully spawning lemon giraffes inside factories. So we use this to create the modular engine. So we're going to take the exact same system and we're going to grab a constructor. In fact, let's do it outside. Maybe 3 constructors. I think that'll be enough. And these are all going to be producing those empty canisters for us. So we will summer sloop both of these. Okay, they're connected. We're going to grab our plastic and they will start producing. Now we need 2,800 for this build. So it's going to take a few minutes, but once it's done, we'll head back over to the fuel plant. Okay, let's see how we're getting on. Oh, wonderful. So that is 2,400. It's like 1 more minute's worth. I think that's 2,800. Yeah, perfect. We'll take them for good luck as well. This setup is raring to go. We've got all of the heavy oil residue and water backed up in these. So we're just going to add 100 to each of the packages. And we don't want to keep filling it. We don't want it to get to a point where there's not enough room on the belt for the cycle to complete, because otherwise you're going to find that the system stalls. So that is why we're only putting 200 in, because that is enough to ensure that this belt is free. And I promise you, doing it this way, having a complete circuit and manually feeding all of these is a much safer option when it comes to doing this setup. The last thing you want is to be going over and trying to fix all of your lines because you've overfilled them. And I learned that the hard way, doing a build much bigger than this. Now at this point we need to make sure that we are using up the fuel, and if we're going to be producing, was it 800? Yes, that is going to be quite a lot of generators. So I'm just going to do that really quickly, and then once it's done I'll show you them running. Then after that we'll go over the setup and then go on to the next system. I tell you what, I have been placing this for the last 40 minutes or so. I made a huge mistake, which was not creating a generator blueprint with already a connection for the pipeline and also a power pole on the outside or the back side. It would have saved me a ton of time, and we could have just spammed it in blueprint auto connect mode, and then all we need to do is connect the power at the back and it would have been set up. But oh well, we've learned our mistake. And hopefully you've learned it from me as well. All right, so we're currently producing just shy of 20 gigawatts. And look at that. Perfectly flat. Ah, balls. Almost perfectly flat. I'm going to check this out in a little bit, but I presume it's just making sure that the liquids aren't sloshing back and forth here. So all of these are on. I wonder if it's from a different setup. Anyway, let's have a look at the build's layout. Okay, so here we are. It's really pretty simple. So we have 10 refineries, each producing the heavy oil residue on the left-hand side, with all of the polymer resin that's being produced being sunk. I should also mention that we have 300 crude oil being sent to this facility. That 300 crude oil is turned into 400 heavy oil residue, which is running across the top of the build and then to the center, where it's lifted up and sent down 2 manifolds. Each manifold has 6.66 refineries producing the diluted packaged fuel, and for each refinery we have a packager that's packaging water and sending it to the diluted packaged fuel refinery, and an unpackager which is unpackaging the packaged fuel and sending the empty canisters back in a loop to the water packager. The fuel is then being sent along a pipe to 20 generators, and that's each section. So we have a total of 40 generators running from this little setup here, which is a total of 10 gigawatts of power. The water packager line is being fed by a line of 400 water, and that's for each section. So 400 on the left, 400 on the right, and that's from 3 water extractors, 2 running at 100% clock speed, and then a third one which is running at, I think, 150% clock speed. Sorry, 133.33% clock speed on those 2 water extractors. Now, looking at this refinery really quickly, I can see what the issue is immediately, and that is it's not receiving quite enough packages. So I will go back and get some empty canisters and then fill them up. We'll let it run for a little bit, and hopefully these will all be running a little bit faster than 75% clock speed. These are now filled with another 100 packages each, and you can see the efficiency is now 100%. But if we look now, proof is in the pudding, eh? We now have a flat line. So that is running fantastic. We will check this a little later just to make sure. But until then, let's get started on the next setup. Looking over this setup again, we can now go to our recipes, and rather than do the diluted packaged fuel, we can set up the diluted fuel, and we can do the same here. And notice how it's producing the exact same amount of fuel, but it is a much simpler build, just requiring more expensive or higher tier items. So it's 10 refineries and 8 blenders. Unfortunately, with us consuming 800 water and producing 800 fuel, we will have to do this as 2 separate lines again, but we're going to set up a blender blueprint really quickly, and then we'll set this up. Okay, so we're going to grab our blender. We're going to make this as simple a setup as possible so that we can probably fit 2 actually. That would work well. We'll put 1 there and 1 there. These are each going to be producing the diluted fuel, and we only need 2 blueprints on each line. There is no solid output, it's only liquids, which means we can keep everything on a lower level. And I'm hoping, now that we know that our junctions also connect as blueprints in the auto connect mode, that we should be able to get these to run as an auto connect blueprint. Now we have 2 liquid inputs. That's the only thing we need to worry about on this side. So we're going to set up on this section our water, as that's the lower resource. And then above, we will do the heavy oil. And with these blueprints, if you're setting them up, you should feel free to explore with the decoration. So we'll play about with the decorating here as well. So we've now got that section set up, and I'm going to run a beam across the bottom. Let's just add, maybe in the same spot, another little line, and this will hopefully mean that we can connect this with the blueprint next to us. And just for a little tiny bit of decoration, I will add some signs as lighting. And as you've seen me do a couple of times before, we're just going to go with something really simple. And there we are. That is fine for the purpose of this video. And let's get back over there. All right, I think we're ready. So what I've done with the oil is we've split the 300 extra that we started producing at the start of this episode from there. And we're running all of the 300 extra oil along here to this first setup. And then the 300 oil that they were receiving is now going towards us over here. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to show the difference between this setup and the next one quite easily with this build. So we're going to start off placing this in the exact same position over. And of course, in blueprint connect mode, we're going to connect 3 of these together. And then of course the last thing that we need to do is add 1 more just on the end. We're now going to sink that excess polymer resin because we just don't have the need for it for the time being. And whilst we're at it, we're going to connect the pipelines up. Whilst we're at it, we will add the same 4 industrial buffers. And then from here, we are ready to start placing our blender setup. So from here we are going to, from here will do. I think we've got enough room. Just going to place 1 there. We're also going to just really easily grab the power from that segment. And then over here we're going to flip this, connect the power up. And this here is the actual factory setup done. The only thing we need to do now is obviously hook those 2 generators, which we'll probably do in that segment there. And also bring us some water and connect the heavy oil residue up. Okay, so we've now got the water coming down and these are starting to turn on. So I'm just running all of the fuel along this section now. For the last of the generators. And once I've set up all the generators, I will give you a rundown of the setup. So here we have the setup for the blenders whilst we wait for them to turn on. We have a total of 800 water, similar, well, exactly the same to the build to its right, coming in from the top of the build. We also have 300 crude oil from the bottom, feeding the 10 heavy oil residues, just like the neighboring setup. And we're making sure all of that polymer resin is being sunk. All of that heavy oil residue that is being produced, which is 400, is being sent through the buffers and then along to our 2 lines of 4 blenders. Each blender is taking 50 heavy oil residue and 100 water to run, and that's turning that 100 water and 50 heavy oil residue into 100 fuel. So each line is producing 400 fuel to be sent across to the generators. So both recipes are producing 800 fuel per minute from 300 crude oil. And you can see the difference in size. It is very easy to see that the first recipe that you will gain access to, the diluted package fuel, is a lot more work to set up compared to the blender alternative. But if you're struggling to find the recipe and you need the power, then setting up a small diluted packaged fuel plant along with the heavy oil residue alternate recipe is going to give you a lot of bang for your buck. However, if you're going to be doing much bigger facilities or gigafactories, as we're doing with our Let's Play series at the moment, we've almost, well, we're about 2/3 through our giga smeltery, which is producing a huge amount of resources, and that's going to feed a gigafactory in the end. But if you are doing builds that kind of size, you're going to definitely want to go down the diluted blend route just to get your numbers up without putting too much work into the build itself. And then on top of that, you can partner that with other recipes, which we'll be talking about in future videos. And the great thing I'd say about the blender alternative version of the fuel is it's just so easy, and the chances of you screwing up is very slim in comparison to the packaged variant. Because if you mess up, as I've mentioned and will continue to mention, if you mess up the balancing, the ratios of the packages, then you're gonna have trouble on your hands. But anyway, this has been quite the episode. We have finally built it and it's all up and running. I've just disconnected it from the rest of the circuit so we can check that there are no drops in the power here. This is the power grid and it is producing 20,000 megawatts with a capacity for 20,000. And as you can see, consumption is just over 10% of that. Down along all of these, they're obviously cordoned off and we have a little walkway across to the water for now. We've done the exact same thing on this side, except this goes through the middle of our blenders. And you can see here how spending a bit of time decorating your blueprints can just make really easy and clean themes and styles to your build. Eventually, this will be turned into, I should imagine, turbo fuel. I think we'll do that with this build later on. And we'll probably keep it so that we've got the 2 different sections. I don't see myself deleting all of this to redo it as blenders, but I did want to show you the difference and hopefully you have a better idea as to power, or mid-game power, let's say, and more importantly, it highlights the importance for you to go out and explore, find those crash pods to get those hard drives so that you can experiment with some of the alternative recipes once you're ready. But guys, we are going to leave it there for this one. Obviously, we do have the factory tours on the go at the moment, as well as my current Let's Play series. So if you are interested in some much bigger builds that are decorated, then do check out the video that you'll see next. But special thanks, as always, goes to you guys for watching this, but also all of our incredible supporters over on Patreon who allow me to create this content. Most notably, our Lunar Eclipse patrons, Firefless, The Calamity, Ben, and Star, as well as our Blood Moon of the day, which today is Brain Slug. Until next time, as always, ciao for now.